On the night of April 24th, 2021, a 52-year-old mother in rural Michigan called a friend and asked her to come pick up her youngest daughter, a 5-year-old named Angelina. She didn't want the child in the house for what she was about to do. She was going to tell her husband she wanted a divorce. Her name was Dee Ann Warner, and by sunrise the next morning, her phone would go permanently silent. It will take investigators 3 years and a welding expert to find out what happened to her. Dee Ann Warner was 52 years old, and everyone who knew her said the same thing. She was the life of the party. She was outgoing and warm, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made every person in it feel like they mattered. She was a mother of 5, a grandmother, and a businesswoman who managed 3 companies and a sprawling farm in Tecumseh, Michigan, a small town in Lenawee County, about 70 miles southwest of Detroit. Dee had married Dale Warner in 2006, and together they'd built a farming and trucking operation that employed nearly 20 people. They had a daughter together, Angelina, who was 5 years old, and Dee had 4 older children from a previous marriage, Amber, TJ, Zach, and Rickle, all of whom she was fiercely close to. Every Sunday morning, Rickle would come over for breakfast with her mom. It was their tradition. But beneath the surface, the marriage had curdled into something dark. Dale Warner was a farmer who ran the property, and by the time Dee began talking about leaving, he had transformed into something closer to a warden and a husband. He checked her car's location using the OnStar app 2,100 times over a 16-month period. He had an employee purchase a GPS tracker and place it on her vehicle. He tried to have her phone cloned. He installed surveillance cameras inside the house. He kept handwritten journals in his truck, tracking her daily movements, where she went, who she talked to, what she texted. And the control wasn't just digital. Dee's massage therapist, Stacy Brody, would later testify that she saw bruises on Dee's body 8 to 10 times over the course of their sessions, including handprint-shaped marks that suggested she'd been grabbed. In December of 2020, Dee told a friend that Dale had turned into the devil, and that during one argument, he'd called her a slur and thrown her into a dresser. And then she said something that, in hindsight, reads like a warning no one heard in time. I literally thought he could kill me. But Dee was strong-willed. She didn't disappear into silence. For at least 3 years, she'd been telling people she wanted out of the marriage, and by the spring of 2021, she was done talking about it. She was going to do it. And so on April 24th, she arranged for her friend Amy Jo Alexander to come to the house and take Angelina for the night. She wanted her 5-year-old daughter far away from what was about to happen. The days leading up to that night had been volatile. On April 23rd, Dee discovered that Dale had told their employees about her private Xanax prescription, a medication she took for anxiety and chronic migraines. A fired truck driver's girlfriend had texted Dee about it, and Dee was furious. Not just at the breach of trust, but at the betrayal of something she'd kept private. By April 24th, Dee was visibly upset. She spent part of the day at a lash appointment, crying through it. Her daughter Amber saw her that afternoon and could tell something was deeply wrong, and that evening, when Amy Jo Alexander arrived to pick up Angelina, she noticed Dee had red blotchy spots on her neck, puffy eyes, and her makeup, which Dee usually kept perfect, was a mess. Dee looked at her friend and said she was done. She was going to ask for a divorce. But what Dee didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she was about to confront had already spent more than a year preparing for the possibility that she might try to leave. The 2,100 location checks, the GPS tracker, the journals, the surveillance cameras. Dale Warner hadn't been monitoring his wife because he was worried about her. He'd been monitoring her because he needed to know when this moment was coming. And so that night, April 24th, Dale and Dee had what he would later describe to police as the worst argument of his life. By morning, Dee Ann Warner would be gone. Her phone made its last contact with a cell tower at 7:14 a.m. on April 25th. She received 75 voicemails that day. She never answered a single one. When Dee's daughter Ricky came over for their usual Sunday breakfast that morning, her mother wasn't there. Both of Dee's cars were still on the property. Her purse was gone, but her phone was dead. And when the family wanted to call the police, Dale told them not to get ahead of themselves. But Dee's children knew something was wrong. They reported her missing that evening, and an investigation began that would stretch on for years. Dale gave investigators shifting stories about where Dee might have gone. At one point, he suggested she might be with a drug cartel in Jamaica, but there was no evidence that Dee had left voluntarily. No bank withdrawals, no credit card activity, no contact with anyone she loved. And this is where the story takes its most frustrating turn. Because despite deploying 130 Michigan State police officers, searching over 3,000 acres of property, and using ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the soil, investigators couldn't find Dee Ann Warner. They were looking underground. They searched fields, ponds, barns, and outbuildings. They tore apart vehicles. They found nothing. But the digital evidence was building a damning portrait of the man they couldn't yet charge. Analysts extracted over 156,000 timeline entries from Dale's devices. They found Google searches for chemical cremation, what is liquid cremation, and why is it illegal, and alkaline hydrolysis biocremation. And then, while his wife was still officially listed as a missing person, they found that Dale had searched for 10 widow dating sites. Therefore, investigators now believed they were looking at a murder. They just couldn't prove it without a body. But one piece of evidence nearly broke the case wide open. Surveillance footage from the morning of April 25th, the morning Dee's phone went dead, showed Dale walking across the property carrying welding equipment and an angle grinder. He was moving toward the spray barn, the one building on the farm that had no surveillance cameras. And when he heard a noise, the camera captured him looking around in what prosecutors would later describe as a suspicious manner. But that wasn't even the worst part, because when investigators told Dale that cadaver dogs were being brought to the property, something remarkable happened. Within minutes of receiving that call, Dale contacted his son Jaron, who rushed to the farm. And police drone footage captured Dale using a backhoe to move a rusted fertilizer tank away from a burn pile. The lead detective on the case, Lieutenant Daniel Drew, would later admit in court that searching underground had been a mistake I'm not proud of. It had taken investigators 2 full years to realize that Dee Ann Warner's body was never in the ground. It was above it. On August 16th, 2024, 3 years and merely 4 months after Dee vanished, Michigan State Police executed a search warrant on a property Dale owned in Tipton, several miles from the Tecumseh farm. In a storage building, they found tank number 34, an anhydrous ammonia tank sitting by itself, separate from all the others. It had a non-factory weld on the end cap, and attached to it was a handwritten note in Dale's writing. Out of service, bad dip tube, do not fill. They transported the tank to the Ambassador Bridge for X-ray, then escorted it to the State Police Crime Lab. And before cutting it open, they inserted the camera through a small opening. What they saw was a blue tarp, and inside that tarp was a body. Dee Ann Warner had been wrapped in 2 blue tarps with her arms bound to her torso and her legs bound with duct tape. Duct tape had been placed over her nose, her mouth, and part of her head. She was wearing pajamas and underwear, no shoes, no phone, no purse. She had been sealed inside that tank for 3 years and 3 months while her husband walked past it, while her children searched for her, while her brother put up billboards and organized vigils and begged the public for help finding his sister. The medical examiner determined that Dee had died of strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head and face. Prosecutor Jackie Weiss told the jury, "How many chances did he get to think about what he was doing? Let's assume 3 or 4 hits. Knock her out. She's unconscious. What do you do? Call for help, right? This defendant duct-taped her mouth and her nose so that she could not breathe again. Those were all conscious decisions. For 5 years, Gregg Hardy, Dee's older brother, never stopped fighting. He put up billboards near the Warner property that read, "Help Dale find Dee," positioned where the truckers who worked for Dale would see them every day. He organized vigils. He tied the words "Justice for Dee" to every surface in Lenawee County that would hold them. And in April of 2024, 4 months before the tank was opened, the family held a funeral without a body because they couldn't wait any longer. Dee's nephew Parker stood at the grave and said what everyone was thinking. How do you do this without a body? The gravestone reads, Dee Ann, daughter of Rayner and Wanda Hardy. The family deliberately left off the name Warner. On March 10th, 2026, after 9 hours of deliberation, a jury found Dale Warner guilty of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. He faces up to life in prison. He has never explained why he did it. Rickle, the daughter who came over every Sunday morning for breakfast, never got to have that meal with her mother again. And Angelina, the 5-year-old Dee sent away that night so she wouldn't have to see the fight, is 9 years old now. She will grow up knowing that the last thing her mother did before she died was make sure her daughter was safe. Dale Warner walked past that tank every day for 3 years.